Well, thanks again for joining us, everybody. You're at the Designing Accessible GIS Experiences webinar hosted by Blue Raster. We're going to talk about ADA requirements, best practices, and real-world implementation.
All right. So with that, thank you, Phil, and thank you all for being here today, and we can get started. So accessibility has rapidly moved from a best practice to a clear expectation, and especially within GIS. And as our tools become increasingly public-facing, the responsibility to ensure equal access becomes even more critical. So I'd like to ground us in one central idea today, that accessibility is no longer optional. It's legal, ethical, and an operational requirement. There have been recent updates to the American with Disabilities Act, and it clarified that digital accessibility requirements extend to online services. So everything like websites, dashboards, and web applications. And in 2024, the Department of Justice finalized updates to Title II, and that states that local governments, state and local governments, and public funded entities need to comply. So it makes it clear that the ADA protections apply to digital services, not just physical spaces. And the rule references conformance with WCAG 2.1 level AA as the standard benchmark. So if an organization provides a public-facing GIS tool, those are in scope for needing to be compliant. So accessibility is often framed as compliance, but it also has measurable usability and operable benefits. So when we design accessible GIS experiences, we're not only supporting people with disabilities, but we're improving usability for a much broader audience. And some of the people who benefit from that are users who rely on assistive technologies, older users with reduced contrast sensitivity, mobile users who are on these dense data dashboards, but on a really tiny screen, and then users in low bandwidth areas or high glare field conditions, which is common if you're in GIS fieldwork. But there's a clear operational advantage as well. It expands your audience reach, it improves usability for everyone, it reduces your long-term costs, and it lowers your compliance risk, because retrofitting is almost always more expensive than designing with everyone from the start. And in GIS, that can mean reworking your navigation, rebuilding your dashboards, redesigning entire color systems. So designing with accessibility early is just more efficient. Next, we want to go, well, understanding the law and business case is important, but we want to go into how compliance happens through design decisions. So we're going to break down the core accessibility best practices that improve access and usability for everyone. So let's start with visual accessibility, because in GIS, so much of our work is visual. And the most foundational principle is sufficient contrast between the text and the background. Under WCAG 2.1 level AA, normal body text must have a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1. So if we look at this example to the left, the blue button with the white text, it looks good, but it actually fails because the contrast ratio is 2.94. Versus the button on the right with the darker text, the contrast ratio is 5.41. And the differences may seem subtle, but for users who have low vision or reduced contrast sensitivity, it determines whether the content is readable at all. They might not even be able to see that text, or it may just blend into the background, and now we just have a blue square on the screen. And then the second principle is we can't rely on color alone to convey meaning. So across GIS applications, we use colors in our legends, our charts, our symbology to communicate things like categories or risk levels. But color perception is not the same for everyone. Color vision deficiency is more common than people realize. 1 in 12 men and 1 in 200 women actually do have color vision deficiency. So on the slide, you see the color ramp displayed under different types of color vision deficiency. And we can notice how the colors shift depending on how they're perceived. What appears distinctly blue, white, and yellow to me under typical color vision becomes less clear to others. And the issue isn't that how they view these colors is wrong. It's just that the separation between the categories can weaken if you don't have enough contrast. And let's imagine this applied to a chloropleth map. If we rely on color alone to distinguish the categories, it may mean the meaning disappears for a portion of our audience because we didn't consider other options. So if we can't rely on color alone, what do we do instead? It means incorporating secondary indicators, things like labels, patterns, or numeric values, and texture, so that the information remains understandable even if our color perception is limited. And the goal here is interpretability without dependence on color. All right, moving along is even if users can clearly see the interface, the next question is, can they process and understand the content? Is it perceivable? Text and readability are about reducing cognitive load, and one of the most powerful tools we have is visual hierarchy. In this example, the large heading draws your attention first, and then the subheading, and then the body copy. Users often scan before they read, and if everything looks the same size, the same weight, same spacing, you kind of struggle to identify what matters most. So proper hierarchy guides our attention. And this is critical for screen readers because they read in HTML language. So headings must follow the logical structure, H1, H2, H3, and then body copy with paragraph tags so that these assistive technologies can interpret and navigate the content correctly. Typography also impacted accessibility. Your font sizes must be readable and scalable. And WCAG doesn't mandate exact sizes, but it does require that you can resize the screen up to 200% without loss of functionality. And establishing a consistent type scale, like the one shown here, creates a predictable hierarchy and improves legibility. And at Blue Raster, the #1 question I ask everyone when I'm doing a design review is, what font size did you use? I always recommend a minimum font size of 16 to 18 pixels because that's a comfortable reading level on any desktop application. Okay, we've talked about making text clear and readable, but what about content that isn't text? We often work with images, charts, icons, maps, and they all require a text equivalent. Alternative text, or alt text, provides that meaningful text equivalent for non-text content. When using a screen reader, it's read out loud and it displays when the image fails to load. But if alt text is not just a little description of what something looks like, what should it say? So in the example here, smiling woman isn't really giving any purpose or insight into the picture. But if we say a woman dressed in red, sitting on a park bench, smiling at a person capturing the photo, it's a little bit more meaningful. And if we apply this to GIS, we don't want to just say a map with blue and red counties. Or we could say a map showing higher risk flood areas in coastal parishes and inland areas with lower risk. The second version communicates the insight of what's on the map. And this doesn't mean writing a paragraph for every map, but it does mean providing a summary of what it conveys or giving users access to the underlying data in a table format. This is a fun and quick but important detail. So if the image doesn't have meaningful alt text, the screen reader may announce the file name to the user. So it may read aloud image 584729 PNG, and that's not useful at all. So be careful with your alt text. You name it something purposeful. And if it is a decorative image and you don't want a screen reader to read it, you can mark it as a decorative text with the ARIA label, and then screen readers will completely ignore it. So now let's look at dynamic content, video, audio, and interactive media. So multimedia accessibility ensures that video and audio content is accessible to all users. And the most well-known requirement is captions. All pre-recorded video content must include accurate captions according to WCAG 2.1 AA. And captions are not only for users who are deaf or hard of hearing. They support users in noisy environments like me. I watch my TV with captions because I have an almost 3-year-old who's very loud. or users watching without sound, non-native English speakers, or users who process their information better visually. Accessibility often benefits more people than we initially expect. And for audio media, such as podcasts or briefings, transcripts must be provided. It makes the content searchable, scannable, and usable by screen readers. And for media controls, we need to make sure they're keyboard accessible. And a lot of these you're usually built in if you're using like Vimeo or YouTube, but users should be able to pause, play, and adjust the volume and navigate without relying on their mouse. And then finally, autoplay content that can't be paused or stopped creates barriers, especially for people with cognitive disabilities or screen readers. I don't know if you've ever been to a website and ads just start blaring at you as soon as you're on the page. It makes you just want to leave the page immediately. So it's a little jarring to have something on autoplay. And then finally, let's talk about interactions through forms. Forms are where accessibility succeeds or fails. So every input must have a clear, programmatically associated label, and placeholder text alone is not sufficient. Users should understand what's expected before they begin typing, and errors must be easy to identify. We can't just put a red box around it and say error. Instead, or even just say invalid input, we want to explain what went wrong and how to fix it. So instead of just saying invalid input, we can say your password must contain 8 characters and 1 must be a number. We don't ever want to make the user have to guess what they need to do next. And this clear error handling improves task completion for everyone. And ultimately, that's the core of accessibility, right? It's making sure all users can access information, navigate, and complete tasks independently without relying on any help from anybody else. And I just wanted to make a quick note that Survey 123 is built with web accessibility in mind. So it's a great option for survey input in your applications if you're in the Esri ecosystem. So we've covered the core principles: visual clarity, readable content, meaningful alternatives, non-text elements, accessible media, and forms. And our next question is, how does this practically translate into the tools we use? So we're going to show what this looks like in practice. I'm going to turn it over to Ty, who will walk through accessibility considerations directly within the Esri ecosystem with Dashboards, Experience Builder, and Hub.
Thank you, Aaliyah. So first I'm going to talk through these in theory, and then we're going to switch over to a live demo where I can show you how to find some of these accessibility features directly in the ArcGIS or directly in these online applications. So when we talk about accessibility in ArcGIS dashboards, we're really talking about layout and design first and foremost. Accessibility isn't something that you add at the end, but it's built into how you design your layout, your charts, your graphics, everything from the beginning. So the first thing is readable layouts and structure. The order of your widgets actually matters in an ArcGIS dashboard. Screen readers actually interpret your dashboard in the order the elements are placed in the layout, not necessarily how they visually appear. So that means logical hierarchy isn't just good design, but it's also functional accessibility. Second, and probably one that Aaliyah talked about at length, is alternative text for all the elements. Dashboards allow you to add alternative text to charts, indicators, and maps. And this is really critical. If a user cannot see your map or chart, the alternative text becomes pretty much their entire experience. Instead of saying bar chart showing data, you can actually describe the insight saying something like seeing from 2021 to 2023. And that will help users understand what the information is in the dashboard a lot better. Third is color contrast, and ArcGIS Dashboards actually has color contrast feedback built into the theme section of the application. And so they actively flag contrast issues. And this actually helps you meet the WCAG AA standards by letting you know whether or not that color contrast ratio is above or below 4.5. And just to reiterate that contrast affects low vision users, users in bright environments, and frankly, everyone. When I'm not wearing my contacts, I need high contrast. In ArcGIS Dashboards, keyboard navigation is a thing. Not every user interacts with a mouse, and you can actually navigate and interact with an ArcGIS dashboard through tab navigation. So this also means that the order of your layout directly affects usability. And that's something that I'll show when we get to the live demo. Now for Experience Builder, similarly, structure, navigation, and content decisions all play a role in accessibility. Experience Builder supports structured layouts that screen readers can interpret, but we really have to be careful and build them thoughtfully. So clear hierarchy matters, headings matter, and logical nesting of your widgets in Experience Builder also matter. But I think one feature that I want to explicitly mention, if you take anything else away from this practical functional section of the webinar, that Experience Builder does not initially allow for alternative text for all widgets. You have to actually turn it on. So I'll go through where this is actually located, but there's a button at the bottom of ArcGIS Experience Builder to turn on alternative text for all of your widgets. And that, yeah, that's a huge thing for accessibility in Experience Builder. And then finally, there's also color contrast, and Experience Builder has built-in color contrast warnings, just like ArcGIS Dashboards. So you can change the color of the font, of the background, of the containers, and if there's any issue with that in terms of color contrast ratios for users with low color visibility, then it will give you warnings and let you know that you need to fix those colors. Lastly, ArcGIS Hub. Basically, ArcGIS Hub's layout builder allows you to have a lot of freedom in the way that you design the hub. You can change all of the colors, you can change a lot of the fonts, and there isn't a lot of feedback in terms of warnings letting you know that the way you're designing it is becoming inaccessible. So in ArcGIS Dashboards and Experience Builder, if you create or if you change the font to a color that isn't highly contrasted with the background, you get a warning right away. In ArcGIS Hub, this doesn't happen. You can change and customize a lot of things and become non-compliant without even knowing it. Some of the, I guess, things that you'll want to do when you're designing a hub would be to input your colors into third-party checkers to make sure to check the color contrast ratio. You'll also want to structure your headings properly. So actually using the built-in H1, H2, H3 so that there is size contrast between different sections of text. And this also allows screen readers to navigate efficiently, just like scanning a table of contents when they're going through different rows and cards within your hub. You can also add alternative text because there's a lot of places where you can add HTML and media. So when you're inputting in that content into your ArcGIS Hub, make sure you're following proper web development, accessibility standards, and adding alternative text or titles to things like your images and SVGs and cards and things like that. So just making sure that if you embed a video, does it have captions? If you use imagery, is there an alternative text for that imagery label? And that's where design expertise really makes a difference in your hub, not just throwing a bunch of things and hoping that it's compliant at the end. So a lot of things. Let's take a look at what that looks like in practice. Now, if any of you attended our previous webinar on dashboards and experience builders, this dashboard may look familiar to you. But what I'm showing is just a simple dashboard that has a map containing a polygon layer of the United States of America. On the left-hand side, there is a list element that contains, lists out the state names and then has a link to the Wikipedia page for each state. The first thing I want to point out is that for the list widget, we can actually change the alternative text. If I come in and configure the list widget in the settings, we'll see that there's an accessibility tab just right off the bat. They make it really simple for us. So this is what screen readers are going to see when they're tabbing through your dashboard. And so we want to give it a name that's, really meaningful and actually provides context. So you'll see that the default name is list, but maybe I'll put in, something like list of states. And then Aaliyah would probably tell me that that's not contextual enough. It's not providing enough information for users. So I actually think we should increase the amount of information here. And so then maybe say an alphabetical list of states. But I'm actually leaving off some of the information that there's also a link to the Wikipedia page. So in order to get the full proper alternative text, I think I would want to say that this is an alphabetical list of states in America with a link to each state's Wikipedia page on the right. And that would be a more acceptable alternative text for this widget. Next, I want to talk about colors and themes in ArcGIS Dashboards. So in order to change the theme or change the color of your font, if you come onto the left-hand side, there's a theme tab, and you can choose from preset themes that have been vetted for color accessibility, but maybe your branding requires you to change some of the colors in your dashboard. So if you click on this cogwheel to configure that custom theme, we can customize the colors and come down to advanced. So you'll see that we have things like text color, foreground color, background color. And what happens if I change the text color from black, maybe to a light gray? You'll see that a lot of these just popped up with a warning saying now there's insufficient color contrast because the text color of my header in my list widget, that's not going to be acceptable for anybody with with vision impairedness. So that is the warning that would pop up. And at the bottom of this, there's also the actual color contrast ratio. So we see that it's at 1.2. We need that number to be above 4.5. So if you drag this around on the map, or sorry, on the color box, you'll see that eventually it crosses that color contrast ratio above 4.5, and then we're back into accessible territory. So those are some of the ways that we can make ArcGIS dashboards more accessible. Really quickly, before we move on to Experience Builder, I wanted to show what tabbing through this dashboard looks like. So if you just start hitting tab on your keyboard, you'll notice that things start being highlighted in my browser window. Now I've actually highlighted my header, and now I've highlighted my list widget. And that's how users, if they're not using a mouse, might interact with this. If I hit enter when I'm on the list widget, I can then start tabbing through all of these Wikipedia pages. And then if I hit enter again, it interacts with the dashboard. So, you want to think about how users who might not have a mouse will interact with your dashboard as you're designing it. So play around with the tabbing and the interactivity of the different widgets just to make sure that the flow of your dashboard makes sense for users. Next, I'm going to head over into Experience Builder, and you'll see we have a very similar looking application. I have a map here and a list widget as well as an image. So some of the widgets in Experience Builder have built-in alternative text. If I click on the image in the in the options configuration panel on the right, there's actually already an alternative text box. But one thing I wanted to point out was that not every widget automatically has this alternative text in the configuration panel. So if we want to add alternative text to our list widget here, you have to come down to the bottom. So I hope everybody can see where my mouse is. In the bottom right-hand corner, there is this button that says A11Y, and then when I hover over it says accessibility. We can turn on accessibility here, and then we will see that we actually have an accessible label for our list widget, which I've already filled in with list of the states in America with population area, and I probably could add alphabetical. and go from there. So last, I just want to talk about ArcGIS Hub. And when you are going through Hub, basically a lot of the elements you can add HTML to. Where you add HTML is where you can also add your alternative text. So if I'm editing this card here and edit this in HTML, we'll see that I have an SVG. And for SVGs, the alternative text lives within the title. So not all elements have like an explicit like alt text name. You'll probably want to look up when you're, doing your web development. For an SVG, it's in the title. For an image, there would be an alt text and different cards and elements and things like that. And we also want to make sure that we are using our headers. So in this case, we have our safety label is within an H2 header, and that also helps the screen reader read through this. So I think with that, yeah, that kind of wraps up a lot of my live demo. There's obviously so much more that you can do to deep dive into accessibility for all of these applications in the Esri ecosystem. And hopefully this webinar was very informative. And if you have any questions, yeah, we, I think, have 2 minutes to answer a couple of them.
All right. Thank you, Ty. Thank you so much, Aaliyah. So what are your next steps? Well, you should definitely check ada.gov. If you represent a municipality of 50,000 population or over, you have a mandate coming up here in just a few weeks in April. If you're smaller than that, you have another year. There is a lot of good Esri documentation to review. And of course, we're happy to talk to any one of you about anything that we discuss here today and how we could help you. And if you go to the next slide, we've got our email for contact for Aaliyah and Ty. So definitely can shoot them an email and we can set up a call to chat about accessibility or other GIS needs. Do we have any questions from
Hi, I'm trying to figure out the alt text for maps. Like when I make a map and then I make an app, I can see that I can add the alt text and it gives, it automatically populates some information. Like, but do you have any suggestions? Do you have any recommendations for best practices for how to write alt text for maps?
Yeah, I would say if you needed to describe this map as an image and not like an interactive thing, what's all the information the user would need to know about what's in the map, and do it like that. Act like you're describing an image in a blog post. Hold on, let me mute this user. There we go. If we were going to describe it as if it was an image in a blog post, how would you describe it and be as descriptive as you can?
Okay, so what if a map has a very large territory, like all of North America, and pins, in so for example, one of the maps, one of the classes that I'm at UMaine, we have a intro to folklore class that collects folk items, and they drop, we use survey 1, 2, 3, and they put the information about their folk items and drop pins. So and then we make an app that students can engage with to see the different folk items that they've collected. Like,
I would say something like a map of North America with pins displaying folklore, folk items inputted from public participants or something like that.
Okay, and then how about when you start adding, maybe not in that map, but like what if a map has different layers of data to show like the viability of, so data of like water temperature, so we have a coastal region with water temperature, sea level, so do you get into that level? of detail?
So I think it would depend. If you're using, say, a Esri experience builder, then you can have that alt text for every widget. So for the list or the items in the legend. But if not, and it's just the map with a legend, I think you would have to be a little bit more descriptive in the alt text on the actual map instead of like the individual items, like the legends alt text.
I see. Okay, so you're using the legend to describe. Okay, that's
Mhm.
really helpful. Thank you.
No problem. Greg?
Hi, yes, I didn't realize I could unmute myself. You're talking about experience builder, and if you start like dithering around with stuff, you can make it non-compliant relatively quickly. So my first question then would be, is it compliant out of the box if you just worked with it vanilla?
I guess only if you use the pre-built themes that they had, it would be
Okay.
like, which is their brand, like the color scheme themes, it might be compliant, but I
Yeah.
still think you would need to have that background knowledge or like double check everything you're doing to make sure it is compliant.
And then
Yeah,
on top
okay.
of the color contrast, you would want to make sure that there's the alt
That-
text for all the widgets
yeah.
as well, because that
I would
doesn't come
turn-
out of the box.
Turn it on regardless, the alt text, yeah.
All right, I got you. So basically have somebody else do it for me. Thank you, appreciate
No
it.
problem. John?
We also have a question in the Q&A panel about the auto calculate element tab orders in Experience Builder. And I can see by looking in the Experience Builder documentation that Esri has, they say yes, that you should do that. It creates a logical tab order. So I'm gonna drop that right in there.
John, did you want to come off mute?
I think yeah, there you go. You're not muted, but we can't hear you.
Okay, here we go.
There you go.
There we go.
So you talk about public facing apps, dashboards, hub sites, and everything, experience builders. I'm assuming this also implies internal for your organization staff. So it's both public facing and internal. The 88, would that cover that part too? So if I'm building an app for a county department that's going to be used internally, I still have to do these, correct? Or it should be a best practice.
Well, John, nice to see you, by the way. I looked at the ADA.gov resources for local governments, and it just refers to people. So accessible to people with disabilities. It doesn't make a distinction between internal and external users. So I would say, yeah, it applies to everyone.
Thank you.
There's a lot of really good information at that link, and there are, of course, there are some ways that you can archive old content and remove it from the scope of this compliance law. So definitely take a look at that, and it's pretty well written. Well, thank you everybody for attending and staying on. We